everyone. Welcome to Entertainment 411, your weekly insight into the people who work in the Canadian entertainment industry. Our goal is to shine a spotlight on those who work in front of and behind the scenes. Work in front of and behind the scenes of the entertainment industry. My name is Nick Frew. I am a freelance contributor to the Toronto Star, also SOCAN's Words of Music, and I'm well acquainted with today's guest, Alan Frew. He's a singer and songwriter of Glass Tiger, the new market rock band that exploded out of the gate in 1986 with their Jim Valance produced album, The Thin Red Line, and especially the hits Don't Forget Me When I'm Gone and Somebody, which has not only led them to an exciting career of millions of records sold in their native Canada, but also broke them in the world's biggest and hardest music market to conquer, the United States. As a result, the band, which today consists of Alan Frew on vocals, keyboardist Sam Reed, and guitarist Al Connolly, and has included bass player Wayne Parker, drummers Michael Hansen and Chris McNeil in its membership, as well as a special mention to bass player Tommy Lewis and backing singer Carmelo Long for joining them also on stage during live gigs, was recently inducted into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame and a few years back into Canada's Walk of Fame. They've won 5 Juno Awards and have been nominated for a Grammy. They've also won 5 Classic Awards, which are SOCAN Classic Awards, for having 5 songs that have had more than 100,000 airplays on Canadian radio. Born in Coleridge, Scotland, Alan immigrated to Newmarket, Ontario with his family when he was 16. He also has a thriving solo career with 3 albums, including 1994's Hold On and his current project, 80 to 90 Rewind. You're probably also familiar with I Believe, which is the theme song he wrote with Stephen Mocchio for the 2010 is pretty far from here. 2010 Winter Olympics held in Vancouver, and more recently, he's penned Canada's Song, an anthem that's a tribute to Canada's resiliency, freedom, and beauty. If that isn't enough, he's also hosted his own TV show, Road Stories with Alan Frew, and is an actor and is also the author of the best-selling book, The Action Sandwich, a 6-step recipe for success by doing what you're already doing. And he's also been awarded the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Award for his contributions to Canadian culture. So without further ado, here is Alan Frew. Welcome, Alan.
Hey, Nick, how are you?
Not bad. How about yourself, buddy? It's been a while.
It's been a long time. When they told me I was doing this interview and then I saw your name, I smiled a little bit longer because it's been a long time. It's so good to touch bases with you again.
It's been so long that actually, like carbon dating, I've now actually got rings of carbon around me to tell me how much I've aged since we last spoke. So
I'm not far behind you, pal.
But one thing I wanted to talk to you just to kick off the show. I mean, congratulations again on the Canadian Music Hall of Fame. That must have been such an amazing honor and a milestone. Like, tell me how you felt about it and what the night was like.
Well, the night was incredibly pleasant and fun, and Dan Hill got inducted that night, and Lorena McKenna, and just to be around everybody and Alan Reed and everybody from the Junos. From an industry perspective, it was just a lovely, lovely evening. There was Johnny Reed, my dear friend Johnny Reed was kind enough to come up from Nashville and do the induction. And it was just, it was like old home week. It was great. But sort of corny as it may sound, I felt that the award sort of signified more the sacrifice, not only of what I've been through time and time again, but my family, my wife and daughter and son. My son lived through all of that, when he was a little boy. He lived through the crazy stuff. And I think it was just a lovely homage to them, standing by me all these years, watching me leave time and time again.
It's interesting that you brought that up, because I don't think a lot of people realize, when they hear a song on the radio, or they see somebody on TV, or they see you in concert performing, they don't really realize how much work actually goes into it. And I remember when you were first promoting The Thin Red Line in the U.S., that you had told me a while back that because of the whole process, because the U.S. market is such a big area to cover, that you would travel to just about every radio station in the U.S. in order to promote,
Yeah.
the first single and the first album. So tell me a bit
And,
about that. What that's like.
well, when we signed in America, we had options to go with the sister label Capitol, to go with EMI, but we went with the smaller label within the family. It was called Manhattan. And we did that to try and be a little bit of a bigger fish in a small pond. And they were amazing. And the top guy in A&R was Jack Satter. And I'll never forget, he said to me, how badly do you want this? And I said, well, I can taste it. I want it. And I was a single parent at the time with custody of my son, raising my son, with my parents helping. And he said, well, go kiss your little guy goodbye, and I'll meet you in New York. And I spent 3 months going from radio station to radio station to radio station. And some people might think it sounds romantic, but it was like, it was like breakfast in Baltimore and lunch in Boston and dinner in New York. And it just felt like it was never going to end.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the ironic things that happened at the very, very end of the 3 months, I walked in the front door, and my mother said, someone's on the phone for you. And I said, oh, okay. And I gave my son a hug, and I picked up the phone, and this voice said, you're going to kill me. And I said, what? And she said, Jack wants you to go back to Atlanta. There's a contest, a radio contest, that if you'll be one of the judges, it will really help. You know the game, Nick. It'll help the single. And I literally, a car pulled up outside the house, went back to the airport, and flew back to Atlanta and did it.
I think one thing that we should educate our viewers on is that, when they hear songs on the radio, it's not like all of a sudden a programmer hears a song and goes, hey, that's great, we're going to throw it on the radio. There's usually a lot of persuasion that goes on through different means, and one of them is to have the artist promote the singles in person, and that's what you did for relentlessly throughout your career.
And conversely, now in this day and age, bands like Glass Tiger and Platinum Blonde and Honeymoon Suite and Loverboy, you'll never hear them on what used to be like top 40 mainstream radio. Mm-hmm. It just, I wrote a song, oh boy, I forget when it was. I think it was This Is Your Life. And I remember doing an interview with one of the big Toronto radio stations with one of the program directors. And then I said, so, you're going to play it? And he goes, oh, no, Alan, we're not going to play it, but it's nice to chat with you. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that the trade-off, which, is either good or bad, is that, at least now that you've established a legacy. So, you can go out there and get regular gigs and not have the same sort of pressure that you had beforehand, in order to obtain them. But you're right. I mean, the sacrifice in getting there is just is unimaginable, I think, for people that can't even begin to figure out how to approach the industry. So before we get more into the industry aspect of it, you were born in Coatbridge, Scotland, and tell me about your musical influences there. Like, what got you into music, and how much of a culture shock was it finally coming over to Newmarket when you were 16?
It was heavy. So a little boy growing up I was born in the house that I was raised in, a little post-war, corrugated iron little house with no air conditioning and no central heating, little coal fire in the wintertime, and sweat it out if it ever got hot. And we were a family that would gather around the fireplace and entertain each other. And my dad was the patriarch and the sort of leader of the clan, and he'd put on little shows for the kids, for cousins and friends who brought their little ones. And I watched my father closely, and then I was able to go to school and reenact my greatest musical influence, which was the Beatles. And we get up in front of the class and pretend we were the Beatles. And then I got the bug, and I used to stand outside the pubs in Coatbridge and wait for the old men to spill out onto the streets, and I would sing for them, and maybe they'd give me pennies or sixpence or a Coca-Cola and a packet of crisps, potato chips, and that was my character, and it's still who I am today. I talk about that in my book. And when I came to Canada, it was, and I learned a little bit of guitar, and my sister and I would do little duets and stuff for the family. Came to Canada, incredible culture shock, being 16 with this accent. And it was kind of like the girls found it cute, and the boys hated you because the girls found it cute. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of, disjointed relationships that went on during that time, being an immigrant in this wonderful country of ours. And then I met a lad, Martin Ridgely, who taught me a few more chords. And sorry, I thought my phone was making noise. I can hear voices in the background. But anyway, he taught me a few more chords, and he and I went out and we played at weddings and stuff like that. And then one day I wrote a song that I put on the Hold On album, actually, the first little musical piece. And it dawned on me, this is not Lennon and McCartney. Wow, this is me. I wrote this. And that was the beginning of it all.
I just have to interrupt for a second here, and I'm thrilled that one of the things that people didn't offer you was haggis back then when you were. I mean, I know that it's a delicacy, but I just can't imagine being handed that for when you're singing.
And I've only eaten it twice in my life, Nick, and I don't think I'll ever eat it again.
Well, that's twice more than I have, just to let you know. So, so when you the big break for you, I guess before Glass Tiger, there was Tokyo, even though it included a lot of members of Glass Tiger. How did you form Tokyo? And I know initially it was a cover band, or did you manage to get some originals in there at the very beginning?
So I was in a band called Onyx, Onyx. Wayne Parker was in that band. Al Conley eventually joined that band. And we played every crappy bar you can think of. And we earned our stripes, but we were broke and we were starving, and it eventually came to an end. And I had this wacky idea that I'd worked in factories cutting steel tubes and a plastics factory, and I sold shoes in a shoe store. And then I had this wacky idea that I wanted to be a doctor. Crazy. No money, no sciences. I'd given up on my sciences. But I bugged the hospital daily. Can you give me a job? Can you give me a job? And I was working in a steel factory cutting tubes when eventually the phone rang. And they said, do you want a job? And I said, yeah. And they gave me a job as an orderly. And then I got a second job assisting in autopsies. I was a pathologist assistant, and I did, as you can imagine, what that would be like. And then I put myself through nursing school and became an RN. And in the middle of that, Wayne Parker called me and said, I've met some other guys. And I said, no, I'm done. I'm finished. I'm out. No more. Oh, please, just come meet them. Come hang out. I said, okay. And I went, and they had me sing. And of course, I could see them in my peripheral. Michael Hansen, Sam Reed, another couple of guys whose names I forget right now. And, they were quite taken aback with the voice. And And so they said, please join the band. I said, no. And then please. And I said, okay, but I'll only do it as a hobby. And how did that work out?
Mm. Well, my understanding is that, you know, one of the people that you can thank for your career in an indirect way is Boy George.
Absolutely. You are very astute, my friend. We were unsigned as Tokyo, and we were playing the bars, and I had been approached by Dean Cameron and Capitol Records, and they wanted to split Glass Tiger up. You probably don't know this because I never told anybody at the time. And they created this secret meeting, and I thought I was going down to meet the guys. And when I arrived there, I asked where they were, and they said, oh, they're running late. Okay. And then they get me in the boardroom, and Dean comes in and says, okay, so what do you think? And I said, what do you think of what? And it dawned on him that I didn't know. And he said, well, we don't want the band, we want you. And so we're going to sign you, and we're going to send you to England with David Bendith, that name probably you know. And we're going to make you a star, and you're going to be a solo act. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, this is insane. And so I asked him if I could think about it, which he thought was crazy. And he said, okay, but don't take too long. And I came home and I spoke to my parents, and you know, I was a man at the time, but I chatted with my parents. Mm-hmm. And my mother was, take it. And my dad said, you know, you'll figure it out. And so I never called Dean back, and he hated me for that. And basically said, who does that little Scottish prick think he is? And I would never work in this town again. And so we went back to the drawing board and, you know, started the whole momentum again. But a manager from America fell in love with us, and he had a contact with Culture Club, the management, and he got us a gig opening up for Culture Club on a Friday, Saturday night at Maple Leaf Gardens, 18,000 people, and I was on the night shift at the hospital both nights and had to leave Boy George's big scene and go sling bedpans and work in the hospital, and then go back again and gig again, and then go back to the hospital. So on the Monday, I was exhausted from my 7 nights and my 2 concerts. And my mother says, there's someone on the phone. And this voice came on and said, you're a star. And I said, who is this? And it was Dean and Tim from Capitol Records. And Dean said, okay, you little prick. I guess if I want the cherries, I'll have to sign the whole pie. Get your ass down here. And we went down as a band and we signed the deal.
We should explain to our viewers that Dean Cameron he was the head of A&R at the time. He hadn't become.
He was the head of A&R at the time and eventually became the president of the label.
Yeah, and A&R is as artists and repertoire, and the responsibility that they have at the record.
Sorry, they're the ones that procure and they scout, and when they find the acts, they you know, blend them into the system, find the producer, work on the videos with you. They're the team.
And speaking of that team, I mean, one of the brilliant moves that they at least help organize, and I'm assuming they were responsible for, was getting you Jim Valance as your producer.
Yes.
/ songwriting partner. Jim Valance is best known. He started as the drummer for Prism, and then under a pseudonym, and then he became best known for being the lyricist for Bryan Adams, and all the big hits that Bryan Adams has up until about 1981 were written by him.
They're still together. They're still working together.
Yeah, they still are, but they took a break for a little while. They took a break for about 5 or 6 years, you know. Yes. So, and then Mutt Lange came in with Brian. But I mean, up until that point, you know, it was the Brian and Jim show, and that actually, you know, also spilled into you as well with the Thin Red Line, because don't forget me when I'm gone has Mr. Adams on vocals. And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Jim becomes the producer and a co-writer. Jim co-writes "Don't Forget Me When I'm Gone," and he co-writes "Someday." And we were in the studio, and I had done some bed tracks, and my voice doesn't like big studios. I like to get very intimate with it. But on this particular evening, Brian and Jim were partners, and it was like a marriage. And so Brian stayed in touch with Jim, and one night he phoned the studio, and Jim said, "Brian's on the phone," and I'd never met him. And I said, "Hey, Brian, how's it going, Alan?" Small talk. He said, "I'm coming into Toronto for the Junos," which we weren't even invited to at that time. And he said, "I'll pop by the studio and we'll meet." And I said, "Okay." And so, excuse me, he came to the studio, and we had a few Heinekens, too many. And Jim said, "Why don't you two crazy guys go on a microphone?" And Brian and I thought, okay, that'd be a laugh. And we went on and we sang two songs. We sang "Don't Forget Me When I'm Gone," and we sang "I Will Be There." And we just had a blast. And then Brian and I hung out the next day, and we went to the hockey game, and we never thought anything more of it. And then, of course, the rest is history when it hit the charts.
And most of that album was actually recorded in Jim's basement, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah, Sam Reed would be the best one to talk about that. But, you know, a lot of the bed tracks and the music, they were cut in a couple of studios in Toronto. But then the big one was Modern Heights. Mm-hmm. Remember Modern Heights in Quebec?
Yeah. The studio, yeah.
And Jim wanted me to do the vocals there. And I tried. And then he just hit the button and said, "Okay, let's go to Vancouver." And I did all the vocals in Jim's basement.
How much did life change for you once? Because when "Don't Forget Me When I'm Gone" came out, it exploded. I mean, yeah. It just went through the roof. How much did life change for you at that point? And I'm not even talking about, we talked earlier about the promo stuff through radio, but how much did life change for you at that point?
Well, I'm glad I was the age I was, because, you can see why younger artists, especially in those days, just fall off the cliff, off the edge, because it explodes, and everybody wants a piece of you, and everybody wants to do things for you, and you don't have to do anything other than show up and entertain. I mean, it's a lot of hard work, mm-hmm. but the so-called stardom just explodes, and everybody then knows you, and so wherever you go, they know you. You're in an airport, you're in a bar. I wasn't able to take my little boy to the movies anymore. I couldn't go to the mall. You stop for gas, and everybody wants to tell you who you are. And much and all, as I don't regret it, because what's the antithesis of that? Nobody cares, and you mm-hmm. get nowhere. So I'm certainly not whining. I'm just answering your question directly, mm-hmm. that it becomes very, very difficult to be yourself. Going to my local pub that I loved and I lived in, now the guys have to kind of gather around you and protect you a little bit, because everybody finds out that that's where you're going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you enter also, I think, another world where it's almost unimaginable in terms of access to everything.
Yeah.
You became really good friends with Rod Stewart. I know that you've worked with him. I remember you telling me about a dinner where you hosted and Rod didn't offer to pay, which apparently is Rod's. Yeah, apparently it's Rod's. That's something that he does everywhere. He's apparently very stingy. Although I heard that he actually fully fulfilled the bill for all his songbook records. You love him
Yeah.
so much that he actually,
No, Rod's wonderful, but he's so used to, you go to a pub and everybody's going, Rod, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? And if you've bought Rod a couple of drinks, and now he's happy because someone else bought him drinks. But he's very generous with his, to his band, with his house and his cars and the toys But just a funny guy when it came to paying for dinner or paying. The best part was, you have the dinner and then you go out and the car park attendant hands you Rod's ticket and says, Mr. Stewart says you have to pay for this, and it's his parking.
What a guy! What a guy! One thing I wanted to, before we leave the Thin Red Line period, I did want to talk to you about some of the songs on there, because everybody thinks of bands, especially with songs like Don't Forget Me When I'm Gone and Someday, and other songs that you wrote being love songs, but you wrote quite a bit about history as well, and that was that was something that I think was a lot different, and a lot of people didn't really realize.
Yeah, I think the two things that really differentiated Glass Tiger from the other 80s bands of the time, one would be, I think, my voice coming as a Brit. It just has a different cadence, a different tone, and I think it gave the band a different feel. When we were a cover band, the covers were U2 and Simple Minds and the Police and the Beatles and stuff. And the other was the fact that we dabbled with songs that were quite eclectic, had a whole different vibe to them, like Thin Red Line, like Ancient Evenings, Vanishing Tribe. When we get to the point where Diamond Sun comes out. And I think that it gave us a little bit of separation from the other bands at the time, definitely.
Moving on, then you decided to put out a couple of solo albums, and what sort of prompted that?
Well, we went through 3 Glass Tiger albums, and by the third album, it was definitely waning. It was waning. We had peaked, and this show's way too short for my take on. I'll leave it at this. I've always said the music business is small m, capital B, right? And I think you would know what I mean by that. And the business end of it becomes convoluted and a little bit corrupt, and maybe in major places comes very corrupt. And so it started to wane. And so I said to the guys, I don't want to be in a democracy right now. I want to do my own thing. And I'm going to do an album. I'm going to record some of my own stuff. And I did. I did it for 2 albums. I think Hold On, personally, is one of my personal favorites. I think it's one of my finest pieces of work. I look back on it fondly. John Jones and I did it together. Capitol Records had it just the same as they did. But then a young lady at the time called Alanis Morissette came out with an album called Jagged Little Pill. And immediately the industry then just goes, oh, young 17-year-old angry female. We now all need to find, everybody needs to find angry females. And as you know, that's the way the industry works. Oh, a boy band. Okay, we need a boy band. And so Hold On got overlooked quite a bit, but I'm still very proud of it.
What did that album do for you artistically and internally? Because as you said, you were no longer in a democracy, so you made all the decisions. How did that fulfill you?
Well, it ironically, the writing system never changed, because if I'm not mistaken, Sam and Al have co-writes on it. And when I wrote with other artists, the actual process of writing never changed. It just gives you a little bit more, or quite a bit more, autonomy when it comes to deciding what songs will be on it, to what to what you'll wear, what you'll call it, how you'll promo it, how you'll tour it. You don't have to answer to anyone other than chatting it out with management or an agent. So you don't have to go through the steps of a band.
So you also decided to explore some other avenues along the way. We talked about your road stories with Alan Frew. How was that, putting a television show together and actually hosting it and being in the role of in a way, journalist?
Well, I've always been artistic, Nick. I've always been creative. I have no off button. And, you know, when I complete a project or, you know, well, I'm going to segue for a second, but if I was talking to young artists today, the one thing I didn't do that I would encourage young artists to do, if you're working your ass off and you're becoming successful, take the time to take a breath, give yourself a little pat in the back, and tell yourself you're doing okay. Because looking back on it, this was it was a steamroller, it was a roller coaster. So I've always been that way, and the opportunity to do a little TV show and be creative is something I embraced, and I loved it. And I did it for a year, but I interviewed people like Mike Reno and Marcia Gay Harden and Prince Albert of Monaco, Nelly Furtado, Hulk Hogan. It was just a blast. And I've always had that side to me. And I go on to become a public speaker. I write my book, The Action Sandwich. And as we speak today, I'm writing a novel, and I have a podcast coming out. I had a podcast that was created during COVID, just a little thing on Instagram, but I've got a new one coming out in the late fall.
Well, going back to road stories for a second, there are stories that people hear, and then there are stories that people don't hear. Did you get the ones that you wanted for that program?
I'll tell you a classic. He's the only person that was on Road Stories for 2 episodes. And it was none other than the beloved Ronnie Hawkins. I'm sure you met him. Probably interviewed him. What a character, ladies and gentlemen. He was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I had been told that Ronnie had this story that I'll tell you about in a second. But Ronnie was very good friends with President Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
And he was going through to see President Clinton, and he was saving the story for Ronnie. But I got wind of the story. And so I took to the interview with Ronnie, I took, and I don't even smoke weed, but we took him some nice weed and we took him a bottle of Crown Royal. And during the interview, he got loose. And I said, Ronnie, I've heard this incredible story. And immediately he burst into it. And what it was, Nick, was he played a bar in like Alabama or whatever. And I've heard other tales like this. Mm-hmm. And I've been in the South. But he played a bar. And at the end of the night, he was supposed to get paid. And he goes into the office and the owner says, I can't afford to pay you. You're not getting paid. And Ronnie's like, you're paying me. No, I'm not. And so the guy pulls out a handgun. And so Ronnie kind of says, okay, forget it. And so they all part company. But Ronnie and the band went back that night, broke into the bar, stole all the cigarettes and as much food as they could. And he talked about the pickled eggs, put gasoline down, and he told the story of how would you put a match to gasoline. It's not like in the movies where it goes, this thing just goes, and he took his eyebrows off, and he was suntanned for about a month, and they burned the bar down.
It's hilarious. I remember one thing that Ronnie said. You remember when Bob Dylan went through his Christian period, where he put out 3 albums when he was sort of exploring Christianity, and he told Ronnie, he said, Ronnie, since I've turned Christian, I've sold 12 million records, and Ronnie turned around and said, you should turn Muslim and sell another 50 million.
He was I've met, that's the one thing about, if you ask me some of the accolades, and, I've met some really interesting, famous characters, and you don't get to do that every day. And the ultimate being Paul McCartney.
I was going to say, who made the biggest impression on you?
Would be McCartney. I mean, I met Sean Connery. It was amazing, and I met Al Pacino and De Niro, and I met, toured with Journey and Steve Perry and Journey. I met Robert Duvall, and Julian Lennon's a buddy, and lovely people. But meeting Paul McCartney, I never got the chance to meet John, but meeting Paul was off the charts.
Now you've got another program that you're working on, or another sort of project that you're working on, called 80 to 90 Rewind. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I just again, I have no off button, and Dean, we've since lost Dean, but before Dean passed away, he called me one time, Dean Cameron of Capitol Records. He was the president of the label by this time, and he called me and he said, why don't you do a solo thing of the British invasion? I thought, that's a cool idea. And I did a couple of them. I think I did something by Herman's Hermits and the Dave Clark 5. I think I did that. And of course, I would have done the Beatles and the Stones and whatever. But then I was working with someone else who was kind of managing me. And he said, I think you're making a mistake. You should do your genre. You should do the 80s. At the time, just the 80s. I said, okay. And I dabbled with an album. And I did Peter Gabriel and Simple Minds. I did Madonna. John Waite. And looking back on it now, compared to what I do with it now, it's a little lightweight, but it was trial and error. Recorded it in Nashville with great musicians. There's a couple of really, really cool things that I'm proud of, but it was the impetus for me to think I could have fun doing this. And so in the last probably 7, 8 years, I put this killer band together, and I mean killer. And now we upped our game, and we do like the Cult and the Cure and Pearl Jam, and so I called it 80s, 90s. And I do a lot of corporate stuff, and it's got its own legs, and it's a ton of fun. It gives me the chance to get away from Glass Tiger. My voice, touch wood, is still in all my original keys, so I'm in all the original keys of these artists, some who can't even sing in the original keys that they wrote in those days. And it's just a blast. And if I get the chance, I've got 2 things coming up. I'm doing London at the London Fair in September, and then I'm doing another corporate thing at Casino Round.
Speaking of the difference in the world today compared with the world that we were in when you started out, one of the big there were a lot of big changes. I mean, one of the things that you had, especially when you were doing Tokyo and Onyx, was that there was a lot of live music that could be played. There were a lot of residencies that could happen. You could actually hone your craft on stage. 6 days a week if you wanted. And then, of course, that was also the era where people bought music. Now we're in an era where people rent music because of streaming. Really, like, the gigs that you're talking about, like the corporate gigs are almost, and also the casino gigs are almost the bread and butter these days of a
Yeah.
lot of touring artists.
Yeah.
So my question is to you is that what would you advise, musicians today that are starting out today, like how can they adjust to this new period where, certainly the physical aspect of it and the dollars that were generated by royalties from sales aren't around anymore?
Yeah. So I really don't have an answer, Nick, as far as the young ones go. But I know that the change that happened. So bands like Glass Tiger, Honeyman Suite, Bryan Adams, probably Rod Stewart, all these bands, all higher levels as well than Glass Tiger. Your bread and butter is your legacy.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to make any money within reason. Of course, there are exceptions, but within reason. People are astounded, Nick, to find out that, I personally have never made a penny, not one penny, off of the sale of an album in a record store. Because the small M capital B, the business, they kept you in debt. That's how they worked it.
Yes.
So they put you in a debit balance constantly. Now, thank goodness for performance. Thank goodness for publishing, songwriting, merchandise, because that's how bands like Glass Tiger survive.
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, young artists being signed to a record deal, now there's this thing called the 360, where the record companies want a piece of everything. It used to be they only touched the albums, but now if you make a video, if you sell a t-shirt, if someone gifts you a television, they want a piece of everything, this 360 thing. But again, conversely, and this is where I become a little ignorant about it, is I'm not up on how these younger artists can become influencers and in the blink of an eye with one song make a small fortune and then maybe vanish. I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of that is just record companies. The thing is with new areas like TikTok and social media, that's their new A&R searching, right? That's where they see it. They think it's going to be a hit. They don't know, because that's probably one of the frustrations that you came across, being part of a record company, is that a lot of times there was a lot of second guesswork where they thought things were going to work and they didn't,
And now record companies will say to a kid, "What's your numbers like?"
Yeah.
It's like, what? Well, we want to know what your numbers are like. And so if you've got a great following online, that becomes almost as important to how good you are. And I know it's the same in the likes of modeling, and they want to know what's your numbers like, which is sad. As you mentioned, if you went to Quebec, you performed 3 45-minute sets per night for 7 nights, because you played Sunday. And then you got in the van or the car and you drove back to Ontario ready to play again on the Monday night.
Yeah. I think we should also explain to our viewers that when you get signed to a record company, even if you get a big advance, what they don't tell you they tell you in the contract when you're signing them, is that you have to pay pretty much for half of everything.
Of course.
So, when you see a video out there, the band is paid for half of that. When you see a party that's being held, the band may not know it, but they're paying for half of that as well. So
exactly.
It's a constant.
The classic case of Hammer, the rapper in the 90s. For those of you that don't know, Hammer was one of the top rappers of all time. And he didn't realize that his management and his entourage and and the record company and the whining and dining and private jets and flying. He thought most of that was being supplied to him for being a star. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. He was broke.
And boy, did he have a big entourage.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about your experience with the Olympics, and how you got your song that was written with Stefan Mocchio.
I took a meeting completely unrelated to the Olympics, but one of the gentlemen that was at the meeting was a gentleman by the name of Keith Pelly. And at the time, Keith was the CEO of the Toronto Argonauts. And this is why I've always said that if it wasn't for John Candy, there would never have been I Believe. And so follow the chain of events. John Candy at one time owned the Toronto Argonauts with Wayne Gretzky. I forget the other gentleman's name, it'll come to me. And the three of them owned the Toronto Argonauts.
Pinball Clemens?
No.
Okay.
I forget.
Okay.
And so when the Argos won the Grey Cup, your name goes on the Grey Cup, and they mistakenly forgot to include John on the Grey Cup. So John had passed away. Keith was the CEO of the Argonauts, and they wanted to honor John at the Hall of Fame Awards, or the MVP Awards. And so I got this call from Keith saying, "You knew John Candy?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Do you think you could write a song that would kind of honor John?" And I started this song called The Comedian, and I can't play keyboards. So I called a fellow musician called Mark Jordan and asked Mark if he would help me with it. Mark said, "Alan, you need a real pianist. Call this guy." And it was Stefan Mocchio. Get to know Stefan, we write the song together, we become buddies. And then Keith becomes the CEO of the Olympic Consortium for CTV. And Mocchio had told me that he had this anthem, but he wouldn't play it for me. And then meanwhile, I hear that, Keith Pelly's the head of the Olympic Consortium. So I phone him. I said, "Hey Keith, let me write the Olympic song. Let me do the whole thing, And he said, "Okay, how are you going to do it? You don't score. I'll figure it out." So as I would say to young people, take the job and then figure out how to do it. So I say to Mocchio over and over and over again, "Let me hear this thing that you've got." And he said, no, and this goes on and on. And then finally I said, "Look, if you let me hear it, I think maybe I can write something with it. And I've got a friend running the Olympic Consortium." So he played it for me. And the rest is history. I took that, slowed it down, separated the chords, and I wrote the song that became Nicky Janowski's I Believe. And at the time, she was the most downloaded Canadian in history at that time, and it was a huge copyright. It was amazing.
Was that after she got involved with Quincy Jones?
No, before.
Before, okay.
Before.
You have, as being part of Glass Tiger, one of the things that you did was that you went and entertained troops and visited troops a lot through various, installations like Canondar and a few other places. What was that like for you, and what was the biggest thing that you ended up understanding about the military through those visits?
Well, it started with the sort of those of you and your listeners who may be old enough to remember when Bob Hope had the whole Bob Hope, the comedian that would go over and take movie stars and dancers and musicians, and they would entertain. And there was a guy on the Canadian side called Bob Spencer who asked me if I would like to go to Bosnia. And I just thought it was a crazy idea. And it took 3 weeks to do this. And they paid you a little honorarium, which was negligible. And I went to Bosnia thinking it was only going to be a one-off. And then I went back again and I did Israel and Egypt and I did Bosnia again. And then a Canadian contingent heard about it. I forget what they called themselves, Canada Cares or something like that, which was a little different. It was done directly out of Ottawa. You only went for like 4 or 5 days rapidly. There was no honorarium. No one was getting paid. But you went with hockey players, and you did go with a comedian or dancers, but you were in and out. It was much more organized. And I got the bug, and I went to Afghanistan 4 times. I went to Bosnia again. I went to Egypt and Israel and Kuwait and Oman. I went to the Arctic. And what did I learn? I learned that most of our military, if not all of them, are just some of the most selfless human beings you can be around. Mm-hmm. What they're willing to do for king and country is incredible. When we were in Afghanistan, we were there trying to help people, trying to, when you meet young Afghanis who were just like the kids here, what do they want out of life? They want to listen to Led Zeppelin. They want to date a girl. They want to have a beer. They want to drink Coca-Cola. And at the time, all of these things were like death sentences. And the troops came in to try and liberate them from the shackles of the Taliban. And of course, in the presidency of Joe Biden, it ended up as shambles. But our Canadian contingent they were selfless to a man and woman, and we were there trying to, help them, help educate them, help feed them, help with medicine, and as I say, try and liberate them from the atrocities that the Taliban were committing. So I loved it. We went over there to give them a hug, to listen to them, to talk with them, and then at the end of the day, to sing for them. That was it.
One of the things that happened to you, which must have been frightening, is that you had a stroke, a while back, and I'm assuming you're fully recovered now. But what was that whole experience like, and how did you fight back? How did you get back into the saddle?
Well, it's ironic, Nick. I think today's August the 20th, isn't it?
Yes.
It was 10 years ago today. I was recording a solo album. I was finishing up 80s, 90s Rewind.
Okay.
And my backup singer, Carmela, was there, and Sean, my assistant and my producer. And looking back on it, they said that they thought I was a little more agitated than I usually am. And then when they left, I went to bed, and when I woke up, my leg felt numb. I thought I'd been sleeping on it funny. My arm was weird. And I told my son we'd go golfing, and he showed up at the front door, and I decided to go golfing. I was in denial, and I kept pretending I was okay. And I drove the car to the golf course. And then on the first hole, I teed off okay, but then my arm again my leg were wonky. But then it came back again, and I had a second shot that actually landed very close to the pin. And my son clapped. And when we got on the green, he said, that's a gimme. And I said, no, I want to put it out. And when I drew the putt back, my whole body went. and he caught me, and we went back to the clubhouse after only one hole, and then I felt okay again. Got behind the wheel of the car like an idiot, and luckily I had to stop for gas. And I say luckily because when it came time to pay for the gas, I couldn't speak very well and I couldn't count the money. And that was when my son said, okay, get out, switch. And we went to the hospital. And then about an hour after that, I had a full-blown stroke. And I was completely paralyzed on my right side, my leg and my arm. And it stopped just behind my right ear. Mm. And, you know, as I would tell anybody in my speeches, whenever you suffer severe trauma of any kind, the only way to get back is, first of all, you have to mourn it. I cried for 3 days straight, and then you have to accept it. And so you mourn it for as long as it takes, and then you have to come to terms with it and say, okay, I'm paralyzed. I may never sing again. I may never walk again. What do I do? I accept it. Because you always think, why me? Why me? Well, the universe says, why not you? And then after you accept it, only then can you fight it. And that's what I did. I booked a gig 9 months ahead, and it sold out twice, back to back. And I think it sold out more out of curiosity than anything else. And I went to rehab, and I worked my ass off. And my fingers and toes started to wiggle, and I eventually got back up on my feet, and I got my voice back, and I did those 2 gigs at the Great Hall.
I had a similar experience that wasn't quite as well. It was kind of severe in a different way, and I won't go into it here. But one thing that I found is that when I was in a similar situation, I found that there was strength within myself that I didn't know existed. Did you find the same thing with you? Absolutely,
because you become, like for me, I can never be the guy again that I was. I'm the guy that had the stroke. And so I found my inner strength. I've always been strong. People have asked me, did I change? Not really. But I found a much more profound appreciation for the fact that, you know, death is right here. It's right behind us. It's on the shoulder. It's a heartbeat away. The wrong move, the wrong place at the wrong time, a bug, a disease. No one's immune. No one's safe. And so I found a great sense of appreciation for not thinking that I was immortal. And so I live with that idea of gotta keep going.
And I it's not really maybe it is an anniversary to celebrate, but I'm hoping that you guys are on a cruise in February, aren't you? So at least you can enjoy that. Have you done cruise tours before? Is this
No, we've done Florida and Mexico and stuff like that, but never got I always turned it down, and they bugged me and they bugged me and they bugged me, and I said, okay, I'll try it. And so we're on this 80s cruise next February with other 80s and 90s groups.
That sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun altogether.
Hope so.
I've got just a couple more quick questions. This one's a pretty big one, especially since things are changing so rapidly. But are there any changes that you'd like to see in the Canadian music and entertainment industry?
Changes I'd like to see. Well, I mean, I'm sure I'll talk about Canadians, but I'm sure it's right across the board. I would just like to see, I'd like to see fairness. I'd like to see record companies and publishers and online apps coming along, the Spotifys of the world. I'd like to see them play fair, and they don't. And I feel for young artists who are up and comers that have to face that challenge. When is enough enough? You know, how much richer does Spotify need to be before they can pay out a decent royalty to artists? How much more can record companies do to hoard it all? So it'll never happen, but if I could change something about it, that's what it would be.
And were there any mentors that you had? Anybody that mentored you, either when you were in Scotland or here?
No, not really. I would go back to my dad and say that, unknowingly, he was most likely my mentor because of his character and his willingness to get up and do it. And that was it.
Cool. Just a side note, first of all, Bruce McNall, thanks to our producer, Charlene.
Yes.
Bruce McNall was the third owner of the Argonauts.
Yes.
And there's also a couple questions from the audience that we've gotten. So
okay.
We'll await our producer to throw them on there. So this is from Dana. Hello from Nova Scotia. Thanks for live streaming this interview. I've been a long time Glass Tiger Frew fan, and I can't help but wonder what's next for Glass Tiger and or Alan Frew. Any new music on the horizon?
Well, first of all, I know Dana. She's been a loyal fan since day one. And, I call Glass Tiger the laziest, hard-working band on the planet because, we bust our chops constantly. But when it comes to actually getting back in the studio and doing stuff, we get kind of distracted. Yes, we have new music sitting in the wings and in the shelf. Right now, I'm a little bit absorbed with the new podcast coming out and the novel that I'm writing, but always new music will come out one way or another.
Can you give us any titles with either the novel or the podcast?
The podcast I'll give you. The podcast is Life Through Music. It's a pun, a play on my name, Life Through Music. The novel is loosely based on my life, but the protagonist becomes a much bigger star than I ever became and gets himself into way more messes than I ever got myself into.
Great. Who is your, from Stuart Lowe, who is your favorite Glasgow Rangers player?
Stuart's like family to me. Well, Stuart, that's only Rangers fans would care about this. But when I was a wee boy growing up, there was a Rangers player called Colin Steen, who was my hero. But my true hero and dear friend and the greatest that ever kicked a ball and the greatest goal scorer of all time, and I'm proud to call him a dear friend, is Alistair McCoist, Ali McCoist.
An Instagram comment from Casey James. Wow, you were going to say it was around this time for your stroke. Oh, I guess he was talking about the anniversary.
Yeah, it was the anniversary today.
Yeah.
I love the title of the podcast.
Yeah. Any other questions out there?
Are you working on a second Rewind album? Well, Isabel, I guess I would say yes and no. Yes, we've really upgraded the repertoire. It's killer. And there's someone else, Andre, saying the same thing. But no, I haven't gone into the studio yet. But if I do, I'm going to do it differently this time. I'm going to take my killer band that I've got, and we're just going to go into the studio, and we're going to do it. Most of it live off the floor. Just the way we perform live.
Do you want to name your killer band?
Say again?
Do you want to name your killer band? Do you want to give them some props?
Well, it's called 80s, 90s Rewind. And that's what it is. I do all these great bona fide hits, these number one hits from the 80s, Midnight Oil, Tears for Fears, The Cure. Anybody out there, maybe in the corporate world or someone that has a groovy little bar that they own or whatever, get in touch with us, and I think you'd love it.
No, I understand that, but who are the players in the band? I guess is basically.
Oh, my band.
Yeah.
Well, Chris McNeil, the Glass Tiger drummer,
Okay.
Tommy Lewis, the Glass Tiger bass player, and Carmela, the singer.
Okay.
They're in my band. And then I alternate between two great keyboard players, Matt Giffen and Peter Kadar. And then I've got three brilliant guitar players that I work with, Bob McAlpine, Sean Kelly, and Big Russell Gray.
All of them are monsters. So.
Yeah, killer.
Excellent.
Alan was my biggest inspiration and mentor growing We Are the People. Scott Nielsen, thank you, Scott. Scott's got a great voice, does a great rendition of My Town.
You have Andre saying, thanks for being an inspiration.
Thank you, Andre.
Bonnie asking, will your new podcast have the same format as Frew the Looking Glass?
A little bit different, because so far, all the people that I've interviewed, I actually sat down with them, as opposed to like this, Nick, where you do it via Zoom. I think eventually I'll probably go back to a bit more like this, but the 9 or 10 people that I have interviewed so far, I actually sat with them.
When you what's the challenge of actually putting together a podcast? Because I mean, there's so many of them out there. How do you differentiate yourself from the rest of them?
Well, that's the thing, it's like anything else now. I could release it tomorrow and no one cares. I could release it tomorrow and only the diehards care. You bring yourself to the table, who you are. I believe in myself. I believe that there's only one Alan Frew. The way I approach it is from this sort of, I'm an individual with individualistic ideas and the way I approach things. I can go between public speaking into a little bit of comedy, self-deprecating if need be. And of course, I can pick up a guitar and belt it out and then say to, Tony Robbins, let me see you do that. But the proof will be in the pudding, I know there's a cajillion podcasts out there, just like there's a cajillion bands.
We've got one from Casey James. Are you going to do any more paintings? My wall here is still bare.
Well, I'm also a painter, and people over time commissioned me to do paintings for them. I haven't done one in a while, but it's never far away. I'd love to get back into it. Do you ever tour the US? Well, see, Tina, this is where it gets really difficult, because people like Tina would just write maybe and say, come on, play Chicago, play Texas, play. But as you know, Nick, it's not like you just go, okay, let's just gather the band up in a crew and we'll go all the way down to, Fort Lauderdale and just play. There has to be a whole commitment from agents and management and ticket sales and promotion, so I love the USA. We always have, even with this environment that was created by basically just elitists. We got to play Las Vegas about a year and a half ago. The fans were fantastic. I've always loved going to America. I always will. And I would love to play it again, but it's just being able to figure it out.
And there's a lot more to it as well, with visas being increased quite a bit in terms of even playing over there. To pay, I think you have to pay something like $3,500 now to get into the States.
Oh yeah, it's ridiculous. They can come here and perform, and we go there, and it costs thousands per band members.
There was just a question on there about whether or not the Road Stories will be available on YouTube.
Well, it is on there. It's not me putting it up. There's about 4 episodes on there already. And I'm presuming more will come, but I'm not in control of it. Who does your tattoos? No one in particular. I've been in different places, and I'll ask who's reputable. And I had some tattoos done in Nashville. I've had them done here in Toronto. I had some done in Los Angeles.
There's a great billboard on Highway 65 when you go into Nashville that says "Tattoos done while you wait."
Yeah.
What are your 3 favorite Glass Tiger songs and 3 non-Glass Tiger songs?
Oh, Rebecca, give me a break here. 3 favorite Glass Tiger songs would be "This Island Earth," probably "My Town," and probably "Someday." That's a tough one. My 3 non-favorite songs, my goodness me, how do you do that? What do I love? I love Nessun Dorma, sung only by Pavarotti. I love Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd. And goodness me, I can't give you a third one. I mean, the Beatles, how many songs? Who knows?
Well, you can do Beatles Stars on 45.
Yeah, really.
Do the medley there.
What else?
I think we're just about there. So,
Yeah.
Alan, first of all, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. And our next guest here on Entertainment 411 will be on September 3rd. He's the man of 1,000 voices, Rich Little. Always likes making a good impression, or several of them. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Nick Cruin, and this has been Entertainment 411. Have a great night.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Alan.